Hi everyone, it is, what is it? It's Friday. Yay, it's leading up to the weekend where we can all be excited about the fun things we're going to do at home for the next couple of days. So welcome to this session of editing. We've got a couple of things in particular that we're going to cover in this session. So specifically, I put a message out yesterday on Instagram about what people wanted to cover, and the resounding question that came through from quite a lot of people actually was about how we get things sharp for print and how we output them properly, ready for print, rather than just looking at them on the screen, which is a great question. We're going to cover that in depth today. We're also going to cover a couple of other things about performance and stuff in Capture One. So let's assume everyone's in. We're going to get started. First thing we're going to cover is actually some of the basics. So obviously, as normal, we are editing on Capture One 20.0.4. That's still the current version. So anything that's referenced in this video is based on 20.04. There may be some things that change over time if you're looking at this video in the future. But we don't know what they are yet, so most of this stuff will still be applicable, but just bear in mind that you need to be on that version, at least, in order to cover what we're covering. For those that are watching live, you've still got the rest of this month to get 25% off the Pro version and 30% off of upgrades. So, the people that are adding in, so hi, Kenneth, you can't do it, you have to go to work, that sucks. So, Harry, hi from Germany, Malaysia, Missoula, UK, cool. So we have a little international gang. Let's also cover, so competition that we were giving away a Capture One license that finished on the 15th. So yesterday we let Graham Morris know that he won a Capture One Pro license. So there's proof that dreams really do come true. But in the meantime, for those of you that didn't, don't worry, you've still got the discount options. And also don't forget to have a look at those 30-day challenge things on the Capture One site. There's some really cool tips and tricks in there, and you'll see me bleating on about backups and all that sort of stuff. Hi David from lovely South Carolina. Everywhere is lovely at the moment. Everyone's home is. Okay, so let's go into Capture One, and funnily enough, one of the images is going to be a David image. So before we even get started in anything in terms of editing, I want to cover a couple of things, and those things are around performance and around setting up Capture One, because this is another question that quite a few people have sent in asking about how do we get the best out of Capture One and so on. Just as a benchmark, so the the Mac that we're editing on at the moment is a, where are we? Oh, you can't see that on my screen. Let me just show you. System information. So we are editing on one of those beasts. It is a Mac Pro. It's the big thing that looks like a cheese grater. It is blisteringly fast. It's got 16 cores. It's 192 gig of RAM. It's got two 32 gig display cards. It has got everything you can imagine that you can throw at these systems. However, Capture One doesn't actually need all of that stuff. So that stuff is absolutely essential if you're going to be doing massive video rendering and 3D graphics and so on. But if you're not, and you're just, but if we're editing images, we don't actually need all that power. What we do need is to make sure our system is set up in the right way. One of the reasons we're using that system, or this system, is when you're editing 151 megapixel files from a Phase 1 camera, which are 16-bit as well, you very quickly end up with a 2 gig TIFF. So I want the computer to be as reactive as possible, but actually a standard iMac is more than capable of editing those files, and certainly anything that's less than that is going to be able to do as well. So let's get these systems set up correctly from the outset. So first thing is, under Capture One, under Preferences, let's go into your Preference pane. Now in your preferences there's lots of things that we can ignore, but there are a couple of key things that we don't want to. So one thing actually is a handy hint. One of the changes that happened in Capture One 20, let me just come out of this a second, is obviously you have these up and down areas of the workspace, so the scrollable area. Now the problem with that is, what people used to do was they used to be able to click on this little widget here for the slider, and they'd be able to use the scroll on the mouse up and down, the slider would change. But as you can see, when I do that, it actually scrolls the screen. If I hold down the Option key and scroll my mouse, then it works again. So this is a change that was put in to allow for the scrollable areas. Not everyone liked that, so there is a preference in Capture One that says the scroll wheel changes the slider value. So you can flip it around. So at the moment, the default is you need to hold down the Option key to use your scroll on your mouse to change the slider value. If you tick this box, then it goes the other way around. So if I click on here and then use my mouse up and down, it changes the slider value. If I hold down the Option key on my keyboard, then I can scroll through. So personal preference, but it's something that's caught a lot of people out. Anyway, back to performance. The first thing and the most important thing you want to check on performance is this hardware acceleration thing here. If you have, if you've got a decent graphics card in there, then you want these set ideally to auto, and it's going to tell you Capture One is using hardware acceleration. If you have a graphics card that's quite beefy and it doesn't tell you that it's using hardware acceleration, then just check that your graphics card is actually appropriate to Capture One. Make sure you've got one of the compatible ones. There's a list that's available on their website. If you don't, send in a support request, see if they will support it. If not, you might want to look at some different hardware. Most important though is this little tab here, image. You have something called a preview size. Now, a lot of people are using IMAX, so 5K IMAX, 4K IMAX, whatever, or a 4K monitor on as an external monitor against their computer. Quite often the default in Capture One will be set to something like 2560 pixels wide. What this refers to, when I'm editing here, effectively this is a preview. This isn't actually the raw file. This is a preview file that Capture One has generated from the raw data. So I don't want this necessarily any bigger than my screen resolution, but I also don't really want it any smaller, because if I have it smaller, let's say this preview size is set to, I don't know, 1024. It means that when I import all these images into Capture One, it's going to build a preview for me to edit at only 1000 pixels wide. Well, if my screen is 5000 pixels wide, it means every time I do something, effectively Capture One's got to work out what that preview looks like again. So it's effectively redrawing all the time. So that can create a massive lag. Now, the bigger this preview file, the bigger your catalog is going to be, the bigger the files that are created for the previews in a session are going to be, and also the longer it's going to take you to import. However, it's better off taking a little bit longer to import your files than getting frustrated when you're trying to edit the file because your preview size isn't big enough. So if you're on a 4K, 5K, 6K screen, set this preview size to be the same, roughly the same resolution as your screen. This is in width, so 5120 in the case of this screen. When I import images, it's going to then bring them in at this preview size. If you've changed that now, because it's different to what you had before, what you need to do is select all of your images in the browser. So I can Command A to select all. And then under Image, you've got this option here, Regenerate Previews. That will regenerate every preview from all of those images back at the correct resolution. So that's going to help you a lot with speed. Okay, next one is the engine. So here's another little fun one. Every time Capture One releases a new version, quite often they'll update some pretty fundamental things in what's called the engine. So the rendering engine, the bit that actually does all of the work for you in Capture One. That engine is actually referenced when you load up this screen, so the base characteristics screen. It will tell you, if I pulled this file in Capture One, in this case version 12, then the engine that this is using is version 12 of Capture One. And the reason is because some people have, so sometimes there's a little change, a little tweak or whatever in, I don't know, color balance, white balance, rendering, something like that, or noise control. If someone is happy with what they've created in, let's say, version 11 of Capture One, when they upgrade to version 20, they don't want to automatically make all those changes, just in case you were perfectly happy with what you had. But if you want to take advantage of the new features, so for example, in Capture One 20, they massively increased the performance of noise reduction and noise correction. You won't get any of those benefits unless you upgrade the engine. So on this tab here, I've got the option now because this was brought in a previous version, so this was a version from Capture One 12, so it was a catalog from Capture One 12. The first thing I'm going to do to get any of those benefits is click upgrade. And it's going to warn me to say, once you've done this, so you're going to get the newest image editing options, great, but they will be permanently upgraded and you won't be able to downgrade it. So in other words, you won't be able to go back to a previous engine from this point. Click upgrade and now it says engine Capture One 20. Great. Okay. If I wanted to do that for the other ones, I can call Command or Command All or Command A, get hold of all that stuff. But let's, so we've upgraded all those. They're using the latest version of the engine. Okay. So let's just do a quick edit on this tree. And then we're going to go deep dive into printing, because printing is one of the things that a lot of people get confused by some of the terminology in Capture One. And also a lot of people, they'll send their image off to print and they're quite disappointed when it comes back, which is a real shame because you spent a lot of time editing it and you're expecting to see something come back and it's not quite the same when it returns. One of the biggest things that affect people is sharpening, and we're going to go into that in quite a lot of detail. So a quick edit for this one. Let's... So this is our famous tree, but taken, I think the previous one was an ST one, this one's a David one. This thing is very, very, very sharp. When I load this is at 200%, that's at 100%, it is excruciatingly sharp. I think it may have been frame averaged, which is where the camera internally can do a long exposure, or effectively a long exposure. I'm not sure, but it was taken at 125th of a second. Got a couple of little dust spots. We can fix them pretty quickly. Let's fix that one there. And we'll come out as I saw something over here just now, there. That little squiggly thing, I'm not sure a dust spot correction is going to do it, but let's go, give it a go. Nah, I was pushing my luck. Okay, so let's create a little heel there. Very simple, brush. What we're also going to cover today is the difference between opacity and flow, because that keeps coming up as a question with lots of people, so we're going to cover that too. But for now, let's just go into, Davis just said it was frame average. Cool, thank you. So yeah, so frame average actually is quite remarkable in this one. So the tree managed to stay completely still for whatever exposure or whatever the length of time the exposure was for to get this lovely reflection here. It's rather lucky. So let's do another heel up there to get rid of that one. I think we're good. Okay. Now, in this shot, this isn't providing me anything. If there was some amazing clouds up there and structure and whatever, then we'd keep it. But actually, I'm not too worried about it because there's nothing up there that's of any use. I could pull it back and see more blue, but our focus is the tree here. What I do need to do, though, is just correct this straight line. So we're going to use our straighten tool up here, which is the plus with the circle arrow around it, and drag along that horizon line, slightly above it. So let's keep it above it there. Cool, okay, and then we're going to crop. And the reason we're going to crop is because we're going to get rid of the non-interesting stuff. So the stuff that's up in the sky. I'm going to keep the original aspect ratio, which is 4:3 on medium format. And we're just going to drag up to there. Now, typically you wouldn't put things bang in the center on a frame, but because this tree is off to the left-hand side, it actually kind of works. The only thing I'm tempted to do is just to pull this left-hand side in a bit more so we don't get any of these stray branches on the left. To distract, and we want to make sure the reflection finishes before that bottom crop. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to tweak a little bit of white balance, so back to my background layer, and with our white balance, let me just pull it a little bit cooler, not too much, and a little less of this green tint. So you've got quite a lot of green tint in there. Let's just pull that up to about there. That looks nice. That's okay. So we're looking pretty natural now. That's pretty cool. I'm not sure about these little white blobs over here. These are the tops of masks on these catamarans. You've got a choice. So photographically, that's a bit distracting, but to be real, they were there. So let's make a decision. In the case that I wanted to heal them out, I'll create a new heal layer. So the first heal layer I'm going to call dust spots. And the second heal layer I'm going to call mast toppers, because I've got no idea what they're called, but they look like things that go on the top of a mast. So with our brush tool here, I'm going to set it to 100% opacity, 100% flow. Keep our size relatively small. I know David's going to be praying for this to go wrong because the heal layer sometimes gets it a little bit wrong. I'm going to choose my source by holding down the Option key, and then I'm going to choose my destination by clicking once, and then I'm going to paint, and we're just going to paint out this. It's done a pretty good job there, actually, not bad. I'm going to use the same vector so I can do it on this one too, and the same one there, not bad. We've got this tree that's been duplicated here, so that's not too good. So what I'm just going to do is change this vector a little bit to alter where it's taking things from. We may not be able to quite get it different enough. So what we're going to do on that final one, we're going to do the cloning into there. There we go. Okay. So that looks pretty neat. It depends, as I say, it depends. If you wanted to keep this 100% accurate and realistic, they were there, but it's just to me, to my eye, they look a little bit distracting out in there in the little 3 white dots. Okay, let's put just a very quick, just a final thing. I'm going to create a new, I'm going to call it radial, and I'm going to create a radial mask just around this tree, and it's because I want a little bit of vignetting, but I don't want it exactly around the middle of the image, because the tree obviously isn't in the middle of the image. I want it really smooth as a fall off, so I'm dragging this inner circle smaller. If I make that closer to the outer circle, you get this line, which is really hard. So we're going to soften that all up to there. Good. And with that, let's just pull our exposure down a touch, our highlights down a little bit, just to get some color back into here. I'm going to actually pull our saturation up a little bit too. And I'm going to switch that tint again. So if you look at it naturally, it's quite green up here in the sky, which it just doesn't feel quite right. So let's just move that tint up a touch, not too much, just to there. Okay, that looks pretty nice. Cool. So there is our picture. Let's just go to the original. So here is our original. And there's our quick edit. We can afford with this one, so we're going to create a filled layer over the top. We've talked about this before. We're going to, because we've got the whole layer filled, so pressing the M button will show me the mask is everywhere. Because of that, what I do now on this layer is going to apply to everything below it, which is all of my heels and all of my clones and all those masks. And in here, I could, let's try, well no, let's just pull down the levels here. Let's pull down the highlights and up the shadows a little bit, just to make them a touch darker, but that's pretty key there. So without and with, one of the questions that's come up a couple of times is people asking, how do we make things pop a little bit? And quite often the answer is either with curves or with levels. Curves is effectively a more, let's call it sophisticated version of levels, because I've got more control over each of the different areas in the histogram. But levels 9 times out of 10 will be the thing that makes your image pop. So you can see without it, it's quite flat. With, and we've just got that boost of contrast that's come up as a result. So we've got our image. So we're going to go into printing in quite a lot of detail. So we have an image that we're happy with, and on the screen, this is, I mean, this is a 150 megapixel image. So in terms of resolution, let me just change these to. Oh, oops! Didn't mean to do that at all. Let's just move that crop back to there. Okay, so it's telling me at 300 dpi I can get away with about 37 inches across printing at very, very, very high resolution, and it will look great. So a couple of things just before we even start talking about printers and resolution. The first thing is DPI. So people always ask, what DPI should I print at? And the answer is, it depends how far the print is going to be viewed from. So if I'm going to view this print from 10 inches away, then my eye, on average, is capable of seeing between 300 and 320 dpi. That assumes you've got 20/20 vision, and it assumes that you're holding it, as I say, 10 to 11, 12 maybe inches away from you. That sounds like quite a distance. If you go and get a ruler and measure 10 inches away from you, between you and a print, or even you and your screen, see how close you are. So in order to see 300, 320 dpi, you've got to be really close to your screen. And the clue is actually in what Apple did with the iPhone when they released something called the Retina screen. So Retina, I think, was about 326 dpi, something like that. And it's designed to be at the distance that you hold your phone. And quite often that's within an arm's length. The maximum, actually, is quite often closer than that. So at that distance, yes, your eye is capable of seeing around 300 dpi. But how often have you watched or looked at an image or a video or whatever at 10 inches away from the screen? It's very, very rare. So the way the DPI actually works is on arcs. And it all then depends on how far away. So if you imagine a triangle coming out of your head, and obviously the further away, the bigger the image can be, and it still has the relative DPI that you'd see if you held it only 10 inches away. So if I have an image that I'm going to view from, let's say, 20 odd inches away, then I could probably get away with 200 dpi, or even less, in fact. If I was going to stand, let's say, 6 feet away from it, then I'm way, way down. I don't need to print at 320 dpi. If I can, well, then why wouldn't I? So if I've got all this resolution in my camera, then why wouldn't I print at the most deep or most dots per inch that I can possibly do? But don't get too worried about the pixels in your camera when it comes to printing, because it all depends on how far away you're stood. A billboard can be printed at something like 10 dpi, if that's still even a high-res one. It can be even 4 or 5 dpi for these massive billboards. So don't worry too much about the DPI, and actually let Capture One do some of this stuff for you in terms of sharpening for it. So we have an image here, and typically then we would export it. So we could right click on here and we could go to export, and we could say export the variant, which is the processed version. And I get this little happy box come up, and that says, okay, what formats do you want, what color profile do you want, and so on, what adjustments do you want to make, and we export them one at a time, or maybe I've selected more than one. But that's not going to help us with previewing, and that's the most important bit, previewing what our output is going to be. So to preview our output, we need to use this proofing tool up here. So let's go to our process recipes. So along the top here on the left, we've got obviously our file system, we've got our tethering functions, we've got our camera lens functions. In fact, I did something very bad there. I didn't make any changes to our lens correction before we started playing with it. I know what lenses was shot on and it will not have any issues. However, good practice says that we should have done that. So we go along the top here and we've got this little one which is like a little cog, and these are our process recipes. So I'm going to create a new process recipe specifically for printing this image, and we're going to create an imaginary print requirement. So we're going to do, let's say, let's print this at 60 inches wide. Okay, so let's create a new recipe. So this little plus button here, and it's got some copies. So if I've already got a recipe down here that I'm happy with to start from, then I can start from one of those ones as a template. But for the sake of completeness, we're going to start with a completely blank recipe. So untitled recipe, and I'm going to say 60-inch print. That's it for wall or whatever. Now, if you've got a print company that you want to use, then quite often it's a good idea to go and get from them the exact specifications they want for your print. Some of them, and it depends on, frankly, how good they are, some of them will only take what's called an sRGB profile rather than your own color matching profile. Some of them will only want a certain DPI. Some of them will want them correctly sized. Some of them will automatically resize for you. So you need to have a chat with the printer you're going to use. But for this instance, let's take a 60-inch print for the wall. Okay, to get the best image quality out of this export, you want it to be exported as a TIFF, and you want it to be 16-bit. Capture One is editing in 16-bit if the original file has 16 bits of information in it. A lot of cameras now are at 14-bit, a lot of them are at 16-bit and so on. Very rarely do you want to be sending to a print 8-bit. The bits refers to how many different tones of a color the print is going to be able to replicate. Now, a lot of printers actually are only 8-bit, but some of the most let's call them professional end print houses and so on are definitely printing in 16-bit. And if you're printing on proper photo paper, so using something like a light jet, then you want 16-bit for the tonality. Then where you'll see it mostly is in the sky. So if you look at banding in the sky, typically that's because you've used an 8-bit file rather than a 16-bit file if the camera was able to record it. So in this case, we're going to set 16-bit. So this TIFF and 16-bit gives me the highest possible print quality. For web, obviously you want either JPEG or PNG if necessary, but JPEG is going to lose you so much image quality. And there are better versions of JPEG out there now, but just stick to TIFF for printing. So TIFF 16-bit. TIFF compression doesn't necessarily lose you any quality, but what it does do is it makes saving the file take longer, and it will also result in a smaller file size. So you've got to determine which is more important to you, how quickly you can send it to someone, or how long you want to wait for it to save. Personally, I just stick them as uncompressed. Storage is cheap these days, don't worry about it too much. Okay, the Icc profile. So this is the color profile that you are telling the printer you want to use. If you're using a color match display, so a display that's actually had its calibration done, so either an ISO display or even the XDR display from Apple and so on. All of those displays are designed to be accurate based on the ambient light and so on. So in other words, what you see on the screen is what should come out in the print. In reality, what you see on the screen won't necessarily match what comes out in the print. And the reason is because a display is backlit, a print is not. So everything, and this is the biggest thing that people come back with whenever they look at a print that's come back, oh, it's not as vibrant, or oh, it's not as bright. The reason is that a display is illuminating all of those colors from behind. It's additive light, it's light-based color. Whereas a print is subtractive color. So effectively, you're putting down pigment on the paper, or you're putting down, in the case of a photo, you're using laser to do stuff, and you're cutting the white of the paper down. So by putting down some blue, then you're layering up, in case of print, so cyan, magenta, yellow and black, you're layering up those colors to cut away the white that's underneath on the paper. Whereas on a display, you're adding light, you're adding red, green or blue light to add those lights and those colors to make a bright image come into your eyes. So there's obviously going to be a difference between the brightness on a screen and the brightness on a print. But what you don't want to be any different is the color itself. So a calibrated display will get that a little bit more accurate, but also around something called the color space. So this is around how many colors this file is going to be able to represent. So in this case, Adobe RGB is a wide, what's called a wide color gamut. It has more colors than an sRGB. sRGB was designed to effectively standardize displays all around the world. So it meant that if you were looking at a picture on a web browser on an NEC display or a LG display or an Apple display or a Sony display, you could be pretty sure you'd be seeing roughly the same thing. But that relies on your display, and those displays had a very, very small color gamut. When you've got a display with a much larger color gamut that's more representative of what you can print, then use Adobe RGB, or if I go to show all, you've got all of these other ones, and you've actually got ProPhoto as another one. So ProPhoto is a great color space to use as well, but speak to your printer. Now, what a lot of printers and professional print shops will do is they'll give you a color profile that you can load in. But the safe option all around the world in general, from my experience, is Adobe RGB. Forget the fact that it says 1998, not much has happened in color since then. So, Adobe RGB 1998. We'll come back to resolution in a second, because this is about the scale. And we're going to tell it, so after the recipe is finished, we don't want it to open. If we wanted to, we could say open it in Photoshop or open it in Preview, but we're not too worried. So, let's talk about scale first. So this is designed to say, well, we're going to do at 300 dpi, and scale it fixed basically means 100%, so whatever this image was. So if the image was 10,000 pixels wide, then it's going to come out 10,000 pixels wide. But for print, you're typically dealing with inches or centimeters. So in this particular case, we're going to say, right, actually, I want to print this at 60 wide by 45 high, so I'm going to put in dimensions. So let's choose dimensions. I can change from inches to pixels to millimeters. If you're doing it for screen, obviously you could use pixels, but for print, it's either inches or millimeters typically. So in this case, we're going to do it at 60 inches wide by 40 inches high, or sorry, 45, because we're 4 by 3. Now, we know, if I just do the maths, I'm just going to grab my calculator. So this image, the actual image itself, is roughly something like 8,000 pixels wide, something like that, I think, from memory, maybe 10,000 pixels wide. So if I wanted to do 60 inches at 300 dpi, I need an image which is 18,000 pixels wide, which means immediately we're scaling up this image. So we've got a risk that we're going to lose some detail. In fact, what's going to happen is we're going to see some pixelation in there. So what I could say instead was actually, I'm happy printing it at 200 dpi, because at 60 inches, I'm not going to be viewing this image from 10 inches away. That would be ridiculous. I wouldn't be able to see the whole image. Yes, you've got pixel peepers that want to go and have a look, but at 200 dpi on this particular print, I'm happy with that at a 60-inch print. Okay, so effectively, if I was printing this at only, I don't know, let's say it was 24 inches wide by 18, it's telling me there that's 4,800 pixels wide. It's actually got more pixels than it needs, so it's going to throw some away, basically. So let's change that to 300 dpi. Ooh, okay, we're at 7,200 dpi, or 7,200 pixels wide. So this relationship between resolution and your dimensions is really, really important. But actually, just have a look at this size here in pixels. Now, if you're worried about it, speak to the print house and just say, look, I'm going to send you my file at 100%. Can you please scale it up? Now, some will do that, some won't. If you do that and you rely on them doing it, what you may find is your sharpening isn't quite correct, and that's the next bit we're going to move into. But for the purposes of ease, you can do it that way. In this example, we're going to actually say properly, I'm going to do it 60 by 40, and I'm going to print at, let's say it's going to be 200 dpi for this purpose. Okay. So what it's actually warning me here is this scale, look at this bottom left-hand side, is a little bit out, because the maximum I can do at those pixels is 53 inches. So this red line here is telling me we've got a bit of a problem here. And it's telling me that actually I'm going to have to lose some, well, it's going to have to do some interpolation. But I'm okay with that. It's just a warning. So let's have a look here at this tab here, which is one of the most important ones, adjustments. So I've set my image here and I've said, all right, I want to print it big. I know because I'm printing it big, I'm going to lose some resolution, but that's okay. And I'm going to now go on to my adjustments. So just for reference, there's nothing stopping me saying I still want you to create this at 300 dpi. The challenge is, so what it's saying is there, yep, you're still over what we could do, is 154% of the original scale. So the challenge is that Capture One is going to have to do some clever stuff, but that's okay, it's designed to. Gary's just asked, in your opinion, does Capture One resize better than Photoshop? Typically I resize in Photoshop and then save a print version. To be honest, I haven't seen much of a difference in the actual resize. What I have seen though is the sharpening in Capture One for output, which we'll go into in a minute. Let me just pull this up on the screen so you can all see the question. So in your opinion, does Capture One resize better than Photoshop? The resizing itself, honestly, you're not going to notice huge amounts of difference between what Photoshop does with its resampling and what Capture One does. What Capture One is going to be able to do a lot simpler for you is apply all the sharpening, which we'll go into now, for that particular size of print. So what Photoshop doesn't know is what you're actually going to end up printing at as a result. So personally, I would stick to Capture One's resize for this reason, if you're printing. In fact, to a certain extent, you could also go into Photoshop, do all of your playing around, bring that TIFF back into Capture One, and still do this as a process recipe in Capture One as well. So let's go into what we actually do with sharpening. So we've set our print. Let's go to the adjustments tab. So there's a couple of other ones in here. Files, so I can say, well, where do I want to put this file when it's finished? Output location, I can choose a folder. That'll pop up. Okay. I can put a subname, I can put a subfolder in there, all that stuff. I can also, at this point, choose what metadata to include. So if I've put any annotations in, or I've got an overlay in Capture One, I can include that. I can strip out metadata, which is also quite important. So if you want to hide where something was taken, if the camera recorded it, take out your GPS coordinates. You can take out your camera metadata and so on. Leave your copyright one in, obviously, but you might want to take out the rating and color tag and so on. And you've got a choice whether you want to include the keywords that you put into that file or not. You can put a watermark on. So obviously if we wanted to put some text over the top, watermark there, and we can position it using the tools here. But in this case, because it's for print, obviously I don't want to put a watermark over something I'm going to get printed. So we're going to say, actually, there's going to be no watermark in this case. And now our important one, adjustments. So let's move in with our adjustment into 100%. So when we are making file size decisions, use this basic tab, and it's quite useful just to visualize, just to have the whole image on your screen so you can get an idea for it. These adjustments, though, are about sharpening and crop. So your crop, we've got two choices. We can respect the crop, or we can ignore the crop on the output. Now, obviously I've cropped this one quite heavily. I want it to respect the crop. Otherwise it's going to produce as a print everything in the whole image, including the stuff that's been cropped out. That's not going to help us. And then we'll go on to sharpening. So for sharpening, we need to move into 100%. So in my image here, I'm going to move up to 100. Bear in mind, if you're using a retina display, obviously your display is probably even sharper than the print's going to be as well. So just bear that in mind when you're doing this stuff. In a recipe, so we're in our recipes tab, I'm going to switch modes now up here into proofing. So the top right, proofing mode. That is going to show me the actual size. It's going to, so do you notice the difference there? 100% here is that big. When I click proofing, 100% is that big. So what's happened? Well, the reason it's done that is because let's look at our screen on the left-hand side here. Our scale for print is 154%. Because we've chosen to print at 300 dpi at 60 inches wide, the proof is showing us that it's going to be bigger than reality. So the reality of the picture is that at 100%. But my print at 154% is going to be that. So this is why we use our 100% view with proofing on, so we can see how the print itself is actually going to look. And then we see, well, actually, because I've done this, and because I've scaled it up more than what the image actually had in data, I've got a little bit of fuzziness around the tree. It's not quite so sharp as it was before. And let's look over here. Yeah, we're losing a bit of detail. So we want some output sharpening. So our adjustments tab here is exactly what we're going to use. Let's say we're going to output sharpen for print. Perfect. Now Capture One is going to make some decisions for you. And the first decision it's going to make is how far are you standing away from the image. So we've said it's going to be a 60 by 40 print, which means, oh, what's that diagonal? Something like 70 something inches. So it's assuming that you're going to be 100% of the diagonal dimension away from the image. Well, that's a bit difficult in maths to do in my head. So instead, what we're going to say is we are going to stand 5 feet away. Okay, 60 inches. And now it's going to preview this as if I was, or sorry, it's going to output it as if I am going to be looking at this from 5 feet away. So in other words, it's going to output it so that the things that I'm not going to notice when I'm far away aren't going to matter, and it's going to sharpen it for that viewing distance. So let's zoom into 100 again, and we're going to come into two specific sliders which confuse people quite a lot, which is the amount and the threshold. So let me just show you them separately. First thing is amount, and remember up here it's telling me that we're in proofing mode. It'll always have that up there as long as I've got the proofing mode enabled. So amount of sharpening. Capture One will automatically put in an amount that it thinks is right, typically around 80 or 60 or 80, something like that. You see here we've got some haloing. I don't really like that at all, because this haloing is going to come out on the print. So if I turn proofing off, we don't have that haloing. When I turn proofing on, because of this sharpening, it's going to add this line in here, which is almost like we've overdone the clarity or something like that. So we don't want that. So the first thing is we can use this threshold slider to try and fix it. So why is that doing nothing? And this is one thing. So people are worried about what do these sliders do. The two things do very different things. So amount is how much sharpening to apply. Let's go up. So loads of sharpening. If I were to zoom back to 100, it's horrible. And the reason is because it's over sharpened, and what it does to sharpen is it picks on the edge and it makes the edge highlight the contrast difference. So we've got an over sharpened image. But threshold does something very different. I don't understand why this keeps going into... let me just fix this number field. We've got a huge number of numbers in that field. That's better. Okay. So what threshold does is threshold tells Capture One when to sharpen. So it's not how much sharpening to do, but it's how much of a contrast difference it needs to see to decide whether to sharpen. So obviously where this is a black bark and the light in the background, it's not going to matter what threshold I put in, it's always going to do it. But here you see that we've got this sort of light grey and dark grey. If I slide my threshold up, you see how that halo's disappearing all the way up to 8. That's a bit too much. Let's pull down here because I've got too much sharpening on to example or to show the point. But what I'm looking for is a threshold that doesn't give me too much haloing at my amount of sharpening. So my amount of sharpening, I can do too much, or let's pull it down to a more reasonable amount, and probably around, in this case, is around 50 to 60, something like that. That looks pretty good. So I'm not seeing any halos now around this tree, but they are sharp. And now I can play with my threshold to say, well, at 0, I'm not going to affect anything too badly with halos. And the further up I go, we're going to see less haloing. But in this case, what I'm looking at is this area here. So I want this to sharpen, but I don't want to see any halos around the edges. So I'm going to pull this threshold down until, right there I see some halos. You see around here? It may be difficult to see on that screen through the web. Let's see if we can get you to there. So I can see a little bit of a haloing here. If I pull this threshold up, about there, it disappears. On the tree, I don't see any haloing, and then we can start playing with our sharpening amount. So I don't want to pull it up to there. You can see it start to appear. We've got the white lines all around the dark areas. So we're going to come back down to where I thought it would be. It's around there, 61. Okay. This file is now set with that threshold. So in other words, what you want to sharpen, which is the threshold. So how high contrast the area needs to be for sharpening to be effective. And then the amount of sharpening is set. In this case, it's around 60. You'll typically find somewhere between 40 and 60 is about right for sharpening. It depends on whether you're resampling to a bigger dimension or a smaller dimension. That's going to have a big impact. But this here is now set for my print. So a 60-inch print for the wall. As long as I'm always using that camera and those sort of dimensions, no problem. I click on the process button. Oh, I didn't use an output folder. Let's just use that one for now. And it's going to tell me here, the variant has had its scaling adjusted to fall within scaling constraints. Scaling must be greater than 1% and 250%. Let's just see if I can pull up that file. Where's my pictures file? I'm just going to load it into preview so you can see. Here, let me just switch my screen across to preview. Okay, so there's our output file in preview. And what we can see if I view at actual size, so 100%, oops, we've got our nice sharpened image ready for print. So when you're printing out of Capture One, use your proofing tools. Let me just switch you back into Capture One. So use your proofing tool up here. That's going to give you what's actually going to come out as a print rather than the 100% of just the image that was on the screen. If this print was different, so let's say I was producing it, so you remember this red mark here saying, oh, we've got a problem because you're making it bigger than we can currently do out of this file size. Let's make it 20 by 15. The red thing goes away because obviously we've got more pixels than we need to do that at 300 dpi. I could even make that 600 dpi. It's still got enough pixels to print. And if I now tell it I want to view at 100%, that's correct. If I wanted it to print at only 150 dpi, then obviously at 100% it's going to look like that. So your proofing tool is going to react to what you have set as output. That's how we print out of Capture One. It isn't actually that difficult. All we're doing is we are choosing a picture that we want to produce. We are telling it what dimensions we want, what resolution we want, the color profile that we want, and the file format. Once we've done that, we go to adjustments and we choose our sharpening options, but we make those changes at 100%. We don't make the changes when we're zoomed out, because then you're going to get some surprises when it finally comes out of the printer. Okay, so if there's any other questions on printing and sharpening, let me know in the comments. But in the meantime, we'll go on to the next picture and then we can come back if we need to. So let's pick on this one by Harry. Industrial picture. So first off, I don't know what camera this was taken with. Let's have a look. It's an art lens, Canon 6D Mark II. I would have thought that we had that in here, but it's probably because we don't have the art lens loaded in at this point. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's going to be the Sigma art lens. No, they don't have a profile. So it's taken a generic profile, no worries. We're going to do chromatic aberration and we're going to analyze it automatically because it's generic, so it has to do it off of this image rather than off of the lens profile. Shot at f9. Could there be some diffraction? Maybe a little bit. We'll have a look closer later on. I'm not worried about purple defringing in this. Just having a look at these light areas here, they're okay. One thing to bear in mind as well, by the way, turn off your proofing before you do this. Otherwise, when you zoom into 100%, so in that case, remember I still have my process recipe ticked. So I told in this process recipe that I only wanted it to be 150 pixels per inch or DPI and 20 inches wide. This becomes my 100% view. Whereas if I turn off my proofing, my 100% view is this. So remember, whenever you're proofing, to go back to the proofing tool and turn off the proofing preview, and also maybe turn off the process recipe just in case you put any watermark or something like that, 'cause that's going to distract you. David said, will the setting proofing reset once I move on to the next image? No. So in the proofing here, this proofing preview will be on now. So where it says proofing here, if I go on to another image, let's go back onto your image. That's there. Let's pick on another image. It's still in proofing mode. And the same with the process recipe. If I've got a process recipe enabled and I go back to this version, it's still going to keep that. So this is independent of the picture that I'm looking at. So remember, you can turn off the process recipe, but for sure turn off your proofing option here. Otherwise, you're just going to have a bit of a hard time because you're always going to be fixed to whatever that print resolution was. Harry, yes, it's Sigma 24-70R. Yeah, you can't find a profile. So Harry's just said can't find a profile for that and another software. Generally speaking, the generic profiles in Capture One are pretty good. So especially if you do the analysis on a chromatic aberration like that. So click on the Analyze tool, or actually with the generic function, when you put that tick in, it's going to do that automatically. You're going to find it does a pretty good job. What I would suggest, though, send a support request into Phase 1 and ask them to support that lens. If they get enough people asking to support the lens, or the lens has been around for long enough, then they'll do it anyway. But certainly send it in. So on this particular one, we've got a couple of things. We're going to do some keystoning, and we're going to do a little bit of color changing. So because we brought this in fresh and it hadn't been used in the previous catalog, it's used the right engine, so Capture 120, that's all good. And let's go on to our histogram first. So on here, we've obviously got some very bright highlights, these spectral lights and the pinwheels from these street lights, and we've got some deep shadows. We've also got a bit of noise in here, so let's pull up our exposure and see what sort of noise we've got. Now it's shot at ISO 100, but over 30 seconds. Yeah, okay, so we've got some let's call it grain in the shot. So the noise reduction in Capture One is pretty good. In version 20, they made some big changes, and in those changes, my mouse has disappeared. It's a bit funny. Connection lost. Okay, there we go. In those changes, what you've got now is a much smoother appearance of when they do the luminance noise cut. Before, you used to get these weird squiggly patterns. Now it's a lot smoother, a lot cleaner when you do the noise reduction. I think I mentioned this before, when you do use noise reduction, and I'm using the exposure high right now to be able to see the noise. In fact, I can zoom in even more. I can go to 200% so that I can see the noise. And I'm looking to make sure that I haven't pushed it so far that we've got some artifacts. And I can see a couple there, little squiggly patterns. So I'm going to pull the noise down a touch to about there. That's good. We're not going to leave this exposure level here. I just want to be able to see the noise that we're dealing with. But that on that slider looks pretty good. I don't see any hot pixels. If ever you see a hot pixel in an image, so that's a bright red, bright green, or bright blue pixel where the sensor's got too hot, you can use this single pixel slider to fix it. A lot of cameras now do it in the camera, but that's where you can fix that with that single pixel. If it is genuinely just a single hot pixel, setting that to 1 will fix it. If it's a couple of clusters and you need it a bit higher than that. Okay, so for noise, that's pretty good, but as a result of the noise reduction, we've lost a little bit of sharpness. So let's go into our exposure tab, which is this one here with the histogram, onto clarity, and I'm going to use that structure slider. Again, not too much. If I use it too much, you're going to see all this noise come back and it's going to be horrible. So we don't want to do that. We want to pull it back so that we can start seeing edges a bit cleaner, but no more noise. That's pretty good. Right, back to normality. Let's put the exposure back down again. And with this, we're going to, let's have a little look. We're going to cool it down a little bit because it's sort of cityscapey, and we're also going to enhance some tint. And we're going to pull up the shadows a bit. Let's pull our exposure. In fact, let's correct the exposure first. It's easier to deal with the color balance once we've got our exposure right. So with highlights, I could pull them up and down, but actually all that's changing is up here. A little bit of reduction might be good because at the moment we've lost a little bit of color. By pulling that highlight slider down, we're back into a nice blue in that tank. The whites is only really going to affect these bright pinwheels. If I pull them down, it's going to have no real effect because they were either overexposed or not. I don't want to pull it brighter for sure. Let's leave it around there, that's fine. Blacks, well, that's going to affect most of the dark part of the image, and we can see that from this histogram up here, because that's the entire area that blacks is going to affect. And shadows is going to affect some of it, but bear in mind the sky is quite mid-tony, and we don't really want the sky coming up to a massive extent. So if you saw the difference, by pulling up the black areas, the sky didn't affect too much. By pulling up the shadows, the sky is affected quite a lot. So in this case, I'm going to leave the shadows where they are and just use blacks to pull that up, and then shadows a tiny bit up there. And we're going to darken the sky separately anyway. I'm going to pull up clarity on the whole image because I want it to really pop. Let's make it look really industrial and really grungy. That's really cool. And then let's fix this color balance. So with our Kelvin, I'm just going to cool it down a touch to about there. And with our tint, I want to get rid of some of this. I know there's green light here, but there's a green tint to the whole image. So I just want to fix that a bit by pulling it up to here. And what that's doing is it's making these whites a bit more neutral. Okay, next thing, we need to do a little bit of keystoning. So you see this lean here and this lean here. Now, I'm worried about doing keystoning on this image, to be honest, because of the amount that we might lose in the picture, but let's give it a try. So let's draw our straight line in line with this vertical here, and this line we're going to draw in line with this upright here. Let's hit apply. Okay, I'm okay with that. It hasn't lost too much. What I was worried about was losing too much on this left hand side and too much of this right hand side. Hasn't done that, so I'm pretty happy with that crop. But what it has done as a result is made this a little bit more level, apart from this floor, funnily enough. So now we've done that, let's actually just straighten this floor there. That's a bit better. Okay, so now we have at least a straight and level image which has been keystoned. We could play around with our crop a little bit if we wanted to. We could expand on that left hand side, so we've got some room to do it. And then I want to pull away the focus from this sky. So to do that, we're just going to create a new gradient layer. Pull that down very softly. And with that, I'm going to pull our exposure down. Cool. And then what we could do with our overall image, a new filled layer. So this one was sky. This one is going to be called levels. And with our levels slider, I'm going to pull our highlights a bit brighter, but I'm going to use this mid-tone one here, just to pull the whole image up. So I've shifted the histogram. So by shifting these sliders to the left, you actually shift the histogram to the right effectively, because we're saying everything that was here moved to the right. Everything that was here moved to the right. So it's having the effect of brightening the image. Okay, from there, let's also then go back to our sky one, because we've now got a bit more latitude to be able to darken that a bit more. There we go. And pull the mood more into this structure here. I can, if I really want to, and I kind of do. Let's go clarity structure, and I'm going to paint just this area down here. So I don't want to affect the sky with this clarity. I just want to affect all this pipe work down here. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute in terms of how much we paint and the difference between opacity and flow. But for now, let me just paint into this area here very roughly. So that's a little bit of a layer. I'm going to just go over it again. A bit more opacity, affect this bit a bit, but I want to keep affecting that main part ahead of me a lot more. David has asked, we had a gradient layer to the sky mountain range in the Monica tree image. Yes, we could on the top and bottom. Yeah, we can come back to that in a second. We'll have a look in a second. So with this one here, I'm going to really punch the clarity up a bit more. And specifically in this area, I'm going to pull the shadows up. So now I'm only affecting this part of the image. I'm not affecting anything else. And I'm also going to pull up contrast, and I'm going to pull up saturation. So this is without that layer, a little bit flat. And this is with that layer, it just punches a little bit more. So we can do that with these layers and with these masks. So let's just create a clone of the variant and reset it. So there's our original image. Pretty cool industrial scene. And there's an edit of it. Which is a lot more grungy, it's got a lot more texture in it. So if we go into these areas here, it's at 200%. So at 100% here versus here, you've got all this texture and stuff, but we haven't increased the noise. So Capture One's done a good job with the noise already, but by using that structure slider here on our background, rather than using sharpening, we can avoid adding any more noise in as well. Okay, so quickly let's go back to the Wanaka tree one. So in this, what we could do, and so David's question, let me just put it back on there. So will we add a gradient? We can. So I can create a new layer called sky, and I'm going to create a soft gradient up there, and I'm going to create a new one called foreground, and I'm going to create another soft gradient there. And with both sky and foreground, what I could do is then pull our exposure into there, which will bring more focus to the tree. What that could eventually allow me to do is to pull up my overall exposure on the image a bit more, because we've softened the brightness of the top and the bottom as well. So yes, it's possible. It's just personal choice as to whether or not you want to darken the sky that much. Okay, lastly, before we finish today, I'm going to obliterate Harry's image, but not in a bad way, and just show you the difference between flow and opacity, because this is confusing quite a lot of people at the moment. So let's go onto our layers, and I'm going to create a new variant of a clone of that variant, and I'm going to discard the image. So just to show you, so if I press M for mask, let's create a new empty layer. So M for mask would result in, as I paint, it going red. If I don't do that and I press Option and M, everything went black. And the reason is because I've now got a grayscale mask. So everywhere I draw is going to show me in grayscale. Behind this is the image and is the red bit. But I want to show you on the grayscale, whoops, let's get capture one back, hit the wrong button. I want to show you on the grayscale version what these tools are actually doing. So let's undo that. So here is my brush. It is a size, let's say, 200-ish, something like that. And I'm going to set opacity and flow to 100%. So I right click on anywhere on the image and I can change my brush settings, or I can click in this little button here and that gives me brush settings too. So I've got 100% opacity and 100% flow. What that means is, as I draw, it is drawing 100% white effectively on black, but 100% mask wherever I draw. Because I set the outline to be 0 hardness, it's going to be a nice soft fall off. If I change that hardness to 100 and drew the same line, it's going to be a hard line that I'm masking. And if I turn this back to the mask, you can see in red, that's the effect it would have on the picture. Okay, let's go back to grayscale. So now, with our hardness back down, I'm going to set opacity to, let's say, I don't know, 20. Okay. And now I'm going to paint. Now, I'm going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and it's having no effect. It's going to stay at 20%. It's not going to go any further. Keep going, doesn't make a difference. Let go of the mouse, and I'm going to paint over it again. Now it's added another 20%. But it doesn't matter how many times I go over it, again and again and again and again, it's still only going to be at that level. Let go of the mouse, click again, another 20%. Let go of the mouse, click again, another 20%, another 20%, another 20%. But each time I need to click the mouse. If I change this to hard, you can probably see it even more. So there's my 20%. Doesn't matter how many times I go over it. Click the mouse again. There's another 20%, only where I've gone over the top. Click the mouse again, there's another 20%. And you can see where I'm not exactly hitting the same spot, I'm getting this weird effect because some areas have been clicked, let's say 8 times, some areas have only been clicked once. But we use that to our advantage. I'll show you why in a minute. So let's flip them around. Let's go to opacity 100 and flow 20. I'm going to put our hardness back down. Now with flow, let me just click the mouse. I'm going to click the mouse and hold it down. And as I keep going, you see it gets brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. So with one mouse click, it's going to keep adding. So it's like the flow of a paintbrush. It's just keeping adding paint, adding. And I haven't let go of the mouse at all, and it will keep going until it gets to 100 at 20% increment. So every time I go over it, it's another 20%. Let's do that with a hard brush so you can see it as well. So there's my 20%. Oop, keep going. And then we're at nice and bright. So here's the reason why personally I use opacity rather than flow. Let me, let's just erase all of that. if I want to draw something like I did here on this image, you see on our mask I have a less effect here. Let me just actually pull up the mask properly in Grayscale. I wanted to affect this area here less than that area, and this area here quite a lot more. So what I then do is use our opacity. Let's go on to here. So we create a nice soft brush, 0 hardness. And with opacity, set quite down actually, we can even get to about 10. But this will allow me to paint. Oh, I'm on the eraser. Let's switch to the brush, cool. This allows me to paint an area here. So imagine there's something behind this. And then I say, actually, I want this bit of the area to be even more. And I want a little bit more out here, but this area here to have even more of the effect applied to it. And this area here to have even more. And what you'd find is retouchers that used to do dodging and burning on people's faces and stuff would use this layering technique to smoothly change the effect that something's having on an image. Whereas if I used flow, so let's put my flow to 10%, and it depends as well whether you're using a tablet or not, but if I use my flow, to do that same shape, I've got to be very careful because as I've gone over, ooh, look, I've gone over the same bit twice. So in one mouse click, all of a sudden, I haven't got quite the same shape that I wanted. That's the difference between opacity and flow. So opacity layers it on one click at a time. So every mouse click adds a new layer of that same opacity. With flow, every time I go over the same spot on a single mouse click, it's going to keep adding and adding and adding to the point where you get a very different result in the mask. So hopefully that makes sense. It's actually a little bit complex. The fact that you've got both as an option is a bit confusing, but it's just personal preference. I know David at Capture One will always use flow. I typically will always use opacity. Some of that's just because I'm used to doing it that way. But play with them. Turn your mask to grayscale, so Option and M, and play with what the two do. This is what will happen with opacity. This is what would happen with flow, trying to do the same thing, trying to get the same output. Okay, so that's it for today. We only did 2 images, unfortunately, but what it has covered, hopefully, is some of the stuff around printing. If you guys have got any specific questions around how would you output a particular print, send them across. Remember, you can use that tool to send us images across. If it's printing, by all means, send across a TIFF if that's all you've got. But we can have a look at it, and we can have a look at it on screen in terms of how you would output stuff properly. For those people that we've edited images for, I will send across the raw file. For everyone else, if you're around next Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the UK, so that's 10 o'clock in the morning in New York, or 10 in the evening in Hong Kong, then pop along and we'll cover some more stuff then. But hopefully that's some preferences stuff done, and that's understood. You've got some printing stuff out of this. And then also we've covered things like the brush tools with flow and opacity. Cool, right, and I will catch you next time. Cheers, bye.